know it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Greetings, everybody. We're back for our second pod of pre-season, and it's the price pod. It's a big one, so I'm not going to waste any time on the introduction except to say hello, as always, to Sam, aka FPL Pricey. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. This is one of my favourite pre-season pods. It's got my name in it, so I've got to enjoy it. I've got to be right up for this one. But yeah, it's great fun, this one. We've had a week to reflect on the prices, and hopefully we're coming at you today with some interesting and timely analysis as we start to get a little bit closer to locking in our drafts. We're still a way off yet, obviously. I think we've got 17 days to go, but it's around that time where we start getting our little biases in. We start figuring out which players we want to hold on to, which ones we're happy to toss to one side. But this is why we do this sort of pod, to try and figure out where the value is lying in FPL this season. So on today's pods, we will be looking at the price list analysis for the entire player set this season, but we'll be going through some particular points and some particular categories that we think are most interesting. So obviously we have looked at the whole player list. We're basing it on some of the data that we've been using for a little while and showcasing some of our findings in the last week. Tom has been crunching the numbers and come out with some very interesting stuff. And we'll take it piece by piece. We're mixing up the order just for a bit of fun. So we're not just going from back to front or front to back. We're kind of mixing up just to keep it light and interesting. Starting off, I think we're starting with strikers today, then moving into the defenders. Defcons obviously is going to be a key factor there. We're dividing up into cheap and premium defenders, having a look at midfielders as well. And then obviously the midfielders from a Defcon point of view too. So should be a good one. We're hoping to keep it, well, we're hoping for an hour and a half, but it might end up longer than that if we get a little bit too obsessed over one or two players in particular. But we'll try our best. We're recording on the 29th of July. So lots of moving parts still going on. Obviously, transfer window is still open and Premier League moves are very much active and happening. But for the time being, I think we are in a position where we can start having a look at some of the prices, because obviously 99% of them are priced up and ready to go. With that in mind, Tom, shall we get cracking?
Let's do it. So 17 days to go. And I think it's fair to say, really like the price list this year. Basically, a few things to mention here. I think Sam already kind of started to touch on it. Very much focusing in a lot of the data you'll see, and we'll speak about for the audio, on players who started lots last year, at least 20 starts, 1,000 mins in all cases. We'll fill the gaps in where we can. Lots of intuitive picks as well that don't fit those parameters, but definitely you'll be like, what about this player? What about this player? We simply can't get to everyone within the time frame that we've got. Sam's putting out a really good series at the moment, deep diving into every different tier across kind of several videos. Definitely worth checking that out if you want individual price points to be looked at. And every year after the show, there's always inevitable despair that we've missed someone or other. But basically, you know, in quite a few places, what I've done to make life simpler for us is looked at some key stats per position, including things like expected goal involvement, points per start, projected data using Rob T's data. Thanks to him and all the good folks at Solio. Please sponsor us. All combined together to give us an index or ranking of players based on how they rate if we put those factors together. That's what we're looking at. Helps us narrow down and really home in on the key players per area. Plus for C-bits or C-berts, I've basically used various data sources to figure out defcons per game, which you'll see, and then use the method to figure out potential added points, then potential uplift as a result of that. It's not exact science. I've made it up, effectively. It's a homebrew based on the data, and it functions to give us an idea of what's going on and help us, as I said, home in what to talk about. That's all the exposition I'm going to give you. Let's get into it. I've said that in double quick time, so if you are listening to 1.5, you may want to pull it back to 0.75 to hear that again. Let's start off, Sam, in the striker area. I didn't bother with Defcon for this one, just because, as I remarked in the first pod, and die out of it, it is basically negligible. Really, you have to go back to Jordan Ayew at Crystal Palace to be a player who actually does feature in Defcon from a couple of years back when he was a proper defensive forward. He was a forward but he was playing as a winger. But overall, I think that this is quite a thin pool, Sam. And I don't know. the more I've looked at the pool of strikers, the more I've come to the conclusion that below 7.5, I'm just not interested. Do you feel the same?
That's really interesting. I have actually kind of fell the other way in the last few days. I think there are 3 good strikers that I am backing to do well this season under 7.5. That being Evanilson, Welbeck, and Strand Larsen. To the 2 latter ones, Strand Larsen and Welbeck, I expect to have penalties. And Strand Larsen, I expect to be more talismanic this year. Obviously, in a slightly weakened team, but I do think at 6.5 million that provides value, especially when that like extra 1 million that I'm shaving off of a 7.5 can be used pretty well in defense, as we'll come on to later. So I think there's potential there. I agree that it's a fairly thin pool, especially under 7.5 million, because I can only really name 3 at a push. Maybe Raul Jimenez if Muniz moves on and he's sole striker at Fulham, therefore getting better minutes. For now, though, I think those 3, Evanilson not on penalties, but really good underlying attacking data, then Welbeck and Strand Larsen, I think are fine. But all it takes is like 1 injury there or 1 bit of rotation. Welbeck obviously doesn't usually get 38 starts. I think he got 24 last season, so does get injured. It doesn't take a lot for it to be really thin pickings there. And the 7.5 million pool is probably a bit more promising.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've got to start with the big man, João Pedro, who I think his ownership percentage from last week is dropping. I don't know whether that's an impact of Gyökeres joining. We'll speak about him in a minute, or whether it is just people starting to actually engage with their teams a little bit more. Last year, according to my index, when he was at Brighton, he came out in the top 10 for strikers. Admittedly, not a massive pool, decent points per start, around sort of 5.4, and decent kind of XGI per 90 as well, over half 0.55. And I think that I can see why people are kind of looking at him, given the price and given he has an impact at Chelsea in the Club World Cup. I do. I've got the lap also on here. It's just under João Pedro, but I do kind of feel like the lap was a bit of their import-export business being used, because he was a player who was a low price, who they could buy him and sell for good value. But I think João Pedro is probably one of those who will complement Cole Palmer, especially very, very well, given his versatility on the field. Decent-ish starts the season. Palace, West Ham, Fulham, Brentford, Man United, and Brighton the first 6. Nothing that particularly worries me. It's just because of potential kind of minute problems that I maybe kind of looked away. But at 7.5, I really like that, and I really like Chris Wood as well. Unfortunately, Sam, he's entered my draft just because like last year did pretty well, as we all know, did overperform, as we all know. But those first 6 fixtures, taking in, apart from the Arsenal visits to the likes of Burnley and Sunderland and Brentford, first up, are a very, very, very much an unknown quantity right now. Those 2 players, I think, are just really, really interesting at 7.5 million price bracket. If we're going to start there, then move upwards.
Yeah, sure. João Pedro for me is a player that I don't expect will be in my Game Week 1 draft, I have to be honest. I really liked him at Brighton at 5.5 million, but adding 2 million and removing penalties in a team that probably aren't as reliant on him, I think minutes are shaky. Obviously, great player. He might lock down 90 minutes a match, but I want to wait and see that happen first before I go there personally. And I think there's maybe an advantage to be taken because his ownership is high. And if he doesn't get off to a great start, he'll probably drop in price fairly quickly. I prefer Chris Wood right now. I'm very tempted to include him from the off.
Yeah.
Penalties, 80 to 90 minutes a match, good opening set of 6. Arguably better than Chelsea's, barring that one fixture. Is Arsenal, it Arsenal? Yeah, game week 4 or 5. Barring that, I prefer Chris Wood to begin with at 7.5. And then we also, I guess, entering the chat at this point is Dominic Solanke, who has a great game week 1 fixture, very poor game week 2, but then after that looks pretty good as well.
It does.
Ticks a lot of the Chris Wood boxes in the sense that he's likely to have penalties. He's probably going to be a bit more talismanic this year. Not bad, if not electric underlying attacking data, and the minutes should be good. I don't know. Are we overcooking Solanke in the community a little bit? Are we expecting a bit too much too soon from Frank and this new form Spurs with XG chances just rolling towards Solanke at any given moment? Are we overcooking that?
Didn't that happen last year as well, when there was high XG chances all over the place for Spurs, and Solanke, as you said, gave us undercooked XG overall data? Look, I mean, I think that part of this is sort of the hope that if you did go with a Solanke, you've got the minutes on board, as you mentioned, the penalties, and you've also got kind of, this is one of those things that's hard to attribute anywhere in data, but the idea that Frank has a good kind of record of improving strikers who fit the mold of Solanke roughly, and I think kind of that plus the carrot of the Burnley fixture straight up is actually a really kind of handy thing that kind of burnishes his credentials as a pick over João Pedro. And I think you're right that Solanke is probably my preference over João Pedro. It's just again, you timestamp this at the start, it's 29th of July at the moment. We don't know if anything more than this, but the Solanke did miss a game because he had some sort of ankle injury, I believe it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like a minor precautionary thing, I think. But yeah, worth noting and worth keeping an eye on.
That's all I'm noting there. Would mention Mateta here, but I'm not going to for time. Safe to say, good pick at some points. And your man Vista, Sam. I mean, that's one we've got to just walk away from, isn't it, for the time being, despite really bloody good data last year.
Yeah, it would have been so sweet. I think people would have been overlooking him if he was secure at Brentford, but he looks like he's forcing a transfer through at the moment, and wherever he lands, whether that be in the Premier League or not, he is going to be a fantastic striker for whoever he goes to. But that doesn't guarantee him a starting spot in game week 1, and it is probably more tempting to have him when he's at Brentford with the talismanic role that will be left by Mbeumo. Yeah, it would have been really nice at Brentford, but it's just a non-starter at this point in time.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? It really is. I mean, we'll see where he ends up, but if he ends up going anywhere, I suspect Brentford won't want an unhappy player who's at the top end of his value and top end of his age range as well. So Martin in the chat said if he goes to Newcastle, I'm sure. And that's certainly
not game week 1 or 2 though.
Exactly. So that's one you just kind of write firmly that's in the watch and wait category, as with a lot of these players. Moving up to 8. Jared Bowen, mentioned him last week. I was quite interested in him. I don't know. The more I've looked at it, Sam, the more I've kind of demurred a little bit. I've come to the conclusion that I'm firmly convinced that if he didn't have Sunderland first, he'd be 7.5 million. Decent enough underlying data. Unsure that opening fixture, when I think about it more, against the promoted team is good on paper, and it's followed by indifferent fixtures after. It's worth noting he matched Salah over the last 18 game weeks or so of last season in terms of just output. So he got 12 non-pen goal and assists. A massive overperformer though amongst mids if we take the second half of last year. I don't know. I think the more I've looked at it, the more I've kind of looked around the price list, the more I've kind of thought, I think it's just a little bit too much for Bowen. And I think you're putting a lot of stock on that first fixture. Yeah. It's worth noting that if you add def cons into the strikers, he actually does come up a lot higher in the index. I think he kind of approaches the top 2 just because he got like 6 or 7 last year. So that's one that's worth kind of mentioning there. But I'm a bit cold on Bowen. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm similar. And you know what happened in FPL Towers here? I can perfectly script it. They had him as a midfielder at 8 million. And towards the end, before they started like maneuvering all the positions around, they're like, yeah, Bowen did play up front a lot. Let's just shove him up as a forward, and didn't reconsider the price. And 8 million as a midfielder would have been absolutely fair. All of us would have gone there to begin with at the start of the season. 8 million for a midfield Bowen, perfect. As a striker, though, that XG data in particular is just, for me, it's probably a shade too low. Nikolai in the chat talking about Fulkrug. I've had a few people on my videos asking about him as well. I think if he's perfectly fit and he gets 90 minutes a match, sure, but it's a wait and see for me. I'm not going to just punt on a player that barely ever got fit for the Premier League last season to begin with. I think it's one that I will come back to once I've got a bit more confirmation on those minutes and that he is going to be the player we hope he can be, but not for now.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So jumping up a little bit further, we will cover Gyökeres, Ekitike in a minute. But of the players who were still around last year, we then hit Ollie Watkins, who just of today was being linked with Man United. So hey, that one's going to change the paradigm a little bit. What I was going to say, hugely consistent across the years, 20 goals and assists, or goal involvements is kind of what you're looking at for him. Lovely stuff. FPL General said that he was, a classic FPL General pick on his pod the other day, and I couldn't agree more. Just incredibly consistent, and one of those players that if he stays at Villa, I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But Newcastle, Brentford, Crystal Palace, Everton, and Sunderland, that first 5, absolutely fine with me. Newcastle in all sorts of bother at the moment, and Brentford, who knows? And then Crystal Palace, Everton, Sunderland, nothing about that worries me whatsoever. A good player to start with, and he also occupies a similar price point to Gyökeres. So if
Yeah.
you want to go there in game week 7, you don't have to do too much if prices do change.
I could not agree more on that. I think 9 million is the correct price for him. I think if he was any cheaper, he'd be in my draft straight away. The only thing that's putting me off ever so slightly is that extra 0.5 million that I can use elsewhere, and the fact that he doesn't have penalties, probably. But now that Gyökeres is in the league and at 9 million, I think it is the perfect excuse to have an Ollie Watkins and then move across to Gyökeres once you know that, not once you know, because he will obviously start matches and be the talismanic striker for them, but it might take a week or two for him to get up to speed. And in the meantime, Watkins is a great FPL pick anyway, with good fixtures, that if you need to hold on to him for a little bit longer, you can, because he'll tick along at just under a goal or an attack and return a game, as we've seen from previous seasons. So the only thing that would worry me a little bit is whether or not he does start to get talked up a little bit more about a move. In the last 48 hours, I've seen more and more. I think you have too, Tom. And it is possible that he heads somewhere else and then we have to reevaluate him altogether. But if he's at Villa and we think he's locked at Villa for the start of the season, then at 9 million, it makes a lot of sense. And like you said, it's an easy jump across to pretty much any striker, but in particular, Gyökeres.
Yeah, and speaking of if they jump across, Isaac is the second most expensive player and second in this index overall.
It's a great transfer window.
Yeah, the highest points per start of any striker last year, 6.21, and obviously, matching pretty much nothing in it between him and Haaland in terms of XGI per 90. I mean, ifs and buts really about Isaac. If he goes to Liverpool, I think that that does start to kind of. I don't know. You and I had this little kind of mini debate the other, didn't we? So I was thinking, well, at that price, I think that maybe the game does begin to get a little bit more sort of interesting, and no Salah drafts may well start to creep in a little bit. But you weren't as convinced as I was, right?
In Isaac,
yeah.
So I think with Isaac, it's if he does obviously go to Liverpool, and it looks like in the last hour or two, there's been a few posts going up on social media saying it's very close now. Very exciting for FPL because it adds another element to that Liverpool forward line where maybe goal share gets distributed a little bit more evenly across the front line. Isaac obviously takes up a hell of a lot of XG. That doesn't necessarily mean Salah is a much worse option, but it's all just marginal gains. And at 14.5 million, any sort of marginal deficit, if you're wiping a little bit of that percentage off of him, then that could be a bit more of an issue. So Isaac, I don't know whether it's net good or net bad for Isaac. I think it maybe just balances things out for him as a pick, because he'll lose penalties, but he's in a slightly superior attack where he'll probably get given a few more big chances across the season. So I think it probably balances out, and I think 10.5 is going to be fair at either club. I wouldn't pick him from the start regardless. I don't think. He's had a little injury anyway. He's not training right now, apparently. The same goes for Gyökeres a minute ago, by the way. I mentioned it takes a while to get up to speed. What I mean by that is he hasn't had a preseason. He hasn't been training at Sporting. Whereas João Pedro, for instance, went straight from the Premier League about a week off on holiday and then went straight to the Club World Cup, where he was already ready to go because he was still basically in match fitness mode. Gyökeres might take a couple of weeks to bed into a new team and to build up match fitness. And I'd say the same is probably likely for Isaac now, because he's going to get to Liverpool late, if at all, obviously. I think at 10.5, I don't like taking a risk on a player that expensive. And obviously people will say, but it's Isaac, it's not a risk. But it is in terms of minutes at the very start. And once we know a little bit more, you can get across to him fairly easily. But for now, I think I'm probably going to wait and see.
Some of that's going to depend literally on if you sell Salah, buy Isaac, and the rest of the money's left over, what you can do with that team. But that's a discussion to be had at that time. Honestly, we're not going to go into that now. And finally, a huge differential. I don't know if you guys have heard of this fella, but Erling Haaland, owned currently by 18% of the game. Yeah, Sporting, as it is, the best underlying data for Forwards last year, who have played over the parameters I mentioned earlier on, highest XGI per 90. To get is that they beat him out for points per start? That is true. They go for a bit of a dry spell, but this guy is playing 4 teams in the first 4 games, Sam, who all appeared in the bottom half of XGC last year. One of those players who, I don't know, them City maybe in general, but he especially seems to have been sort of slightly overlooked, just because maybe the end of last year, him not being around, and maybe left a bit of a bad taste, a bad impression on people. But here's one that I've started to think about a little bit more seriously, actually, over the last few days, wondering if there is a bit of an opportunity there, just because he does seem to have been a tad overlooked, perhaps, in what we're going with at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And he's entering my thinking a bit more at the moment as well. It's so funny how 1 year changes it all. I mean, last year he was coming in at a record price and everyone was buying him no matter what. No, it didn't, regardless of fixtures, regardless of price, he was straight in. I think he had like 70% ownership in game week 1 or something silly like that. Obviously, the combination of Salah and Haaland was slightly cheaper, but it wasn't a lot cheaper. I think it's the fact that a lot of other picks have been rising in price that makes it all pretty unaffordable to have them both in. And it would take bravery and guts to go for Haaland over Salah. But if we said that this time last season in reverse, after a few game weeks' time, it became clear that that was the correct path to take. After that little hot streak from Haaland ended, Salah was the go-to. We could be saying in 7 or 8 game weeks' time that Haaland was the go-to, and why didn't we all think about it more closely at the beginning? Even in an off season, he got, what was it, 25 attack returns, 22 goals, 3 assists from 31 starts. This is a guy that just farms points for fun, and he's going up against some really average defenses. And the thing that we haven't mentioned, the team goal projections are the highest in the league out of all of the 20 clubs over the first 6 game weeks. He also has probably one of the highest goal shares of any player in any team as well. He's one of the most talismanic players across all 20 teams. So you'd imagine he gets 5 or 6 goals in those games. Obviously that's a range. It can vary, but I would be fairly confident he gets around that. So he's a good pick. It's just Salah is also a very good pick. And it's quite scary going without him. And I haven't quite managed to build a draft with both of them in that doesn't sacrifice too much elsewhere.
I can't make it work. And I suppose it kind of feels unsatisfying. We'll get on to Verts and get on to Marmoush at the very end, actually. I think the last thing is the premium midfielders, but it feels distinctly unsatisfying to have a Marmoush or to have Verts in over a Salah or over a Haaland. I think that's what it comes down to, really. And it might be a case that you kind of pick your horse and back it. And it feels like the popular sentiment at the moment, for obvious reasons, is behind Mo Salah. But there's a huge opportunity if you are looking at Haaland and thinking, hey, you know what, let's have a look at maybe going against the crowd early doors, because those are the sort of things that gets you into a really good position like really early on, effectively. Some new joiners to the league. Let's start with Goalkeepers. Came in at 9 million, which I think is a fairly decent price. Ludicrous record in Portugal. As you all know, 97 goals, 102 appearances, all the characteristics of a late bloomer, one of those players who's trained really hard to get to where he needs to be. But it's worth mentioning that last year, the last couple of years, lots of penalties and flat track bully style output. However, as my friend Adam Pritchard reminded me, Arsenal dropped 10 points versus the bottom 9 opposition last year, and Liverpool won the league by 11 points. So maybe it is worth having a player like that. Might be quite the signing. But Hench Kai, I don't know if you've seen Kai Havertz 2.0, Sam. He's absolutely built. But he's still in the picture.
This, yeah.
And we don't know who is yet favoured or how Arteta mixed them together. The Athletic was reporting that Arteta's preferred Tesco, for example, I think, as a signing over Gyökeres. It was very much a Berta signing. We need to see how that all sort of fits together. But, you know, Leeds game week 2 and starting off against Man United, grudge match potentially, one of those sort of narratives against the old manager. We will need to see. And if it's on penalties as well, Arteta was a little bit sort of didn't really confirm that either way. But yeah, one of those players who perhaps if you are a little bit more cautious, you won't be kind of particularly interested in. But if you are going for it based on they pay all that money, surely he's going to have decent enough minutes, then I can see that side of it too. For me at the moment, I'm thinking I prefer Watkins based on what we know now, and then later on I can move to Gyökeres if needed.
Yeah, I think I'm probably there with you at the moment. I am looking at a strategy with like a free hit in either like game week 3 or 6, where having a Gyökeres up front makes a bit more sense. But I yeah, I'm like 80% sure he starts game week 1, but it's that extra 20%. At 9 million, you want 100% or at least 95% sure that he's going to start, and it's just putting me off ever so slightly. Like, one of the main rules that I'm giving myself this year is not to take any silly risks. And I don't think he's a silly risk, but he's close to a risk. And it just scares me off when there are other players that I'm absolutely certain will play game week 1 and also will probably score pretty good points for the first few game weeks as well. Gyökeres isn't going anywhere. I can get to him later on, especially if I've got Watkins, like you say. And Arsenal's fixtures after about game week 5 are really nice as well. So it might be that, okay, you miss out on the Leeds game and the Man United game, but it might be worth just waiting to just double lock and make sure that he is that nailed starter getting 90 minutes. I'm pretty convinced he will be after a couple of game weeks, but it's those first 1 or 2 that I'm just ever so slightly worried that if I put him in at 9 million, I'm compromising elsewhere in my team because that's a lot of money to spend. And if he doesn't start, then I'm relying on lesser minutes than I would have wanted.
Yeah, versus Watkins is also on the table at the moment as things stands, you know. Moving on to Ekitike, really good all-round forward, so a very Firmino-style sort of player. Finished top for underlying non-pen expected goal involvements in the Bundesliga last year. 15 goals, 8 assists. It's the second full season, really. Worth remembering he's very young. Could be good for Liverpool, but the big spectre in the room is Alexander Isak. It's like getting employed as the manager and then next day someone comes in as director when you're thinking you're the man, able to get up to director fairly soon. I feel a bit sorry for him almost, but I'm sure he'll make the most of the opportunity in front of him. Doesn't feel like one that we'll be looking at kind of straight off the bat, one that we'll be probably keeping tabs on throughout the course of the year. Simple as that.
Yeah, these best sides, they're all going for depth at this point. It seems to be the in thing. It seems to be working really well for them. And Liverpool having to stand out centre forwards, Isak and Ekitike, working in tandem, taking minutes off of each other maybe a little bit every now and then, or coming in as rotation when injuries strike. Obviously, Isak isn't a player that's never had injuries. He's had to monitor them on an ongoing basis. So having a quality backup like Ekitike makes sense. I'm sure Ekitike didn't sign thinking he would be the backup, and who knows, he might not be.
No,
but especially if they're going after Isak, they've got Gakpo there still. Salah's not losing his place anytime soon. Yeah, the minutes just don't look secure enough for Ekitike to make him a pick at this point in time. He also massively underperforms his underlying data by the looks of it so far. He is young, so he'll get better, but not a player I'm interested in from the off.
Yeah, totally. Right, I think we've got to move on just because of timings. Yeah. Turno Barry, many newly promoted forwards out there. Didn't report on them because we don't have the data from the Premier League last year, and it's very
Beto as well.
Yeah, I suppose Beto is the cheapest one if you want to kind of give a go to that. But yeah, but Barry signing messed him up. But I just feel like kind of it's a bit of a dead zone when he gets to the cheaper levels right now.
There's not much there.
But I haven't. I don't think I have. Right. On to defenders then. The really interesting bit compared to last year where everyone hates defenders and just wanted to kind of completely nasty invest out of them. Quick word on DEFCONs for them. Looked at all the C bits from last year. So I add them all together and divide them by total given average to work out which of clearances, blocks, interceptions, and tackles was the key element. And his clearances, as Sam mentioned the other week, just so we know, it's kind of 53% of all CBIT outputs for defenders is from clearances. A lot of work done elsewhere online seems to show that DEFCON points last year wouldn't have hinged on the quality of the fixture itself against what I kind of had thought. So I think, as we'll see in a minute, this lends itself to basically looking at DEFCON per start by defender as being a really good way of looking at it. Like it's not really contingent on the fact that, hey, you know what, Everton are playing Liverpool, Tarkowski's likelier to get DEFCON points because according to analysis of last year's data, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be just more about the defender themselves and how they play than the fixture. That's about right, isn't it, from what I've gathered?
Yeah, there are little nuances in the data where like some players in particular skew towards the fixtures where you'd expect them to defend more. But then another defender that you think would be like that is completely the inverse. So I think, just to simplify it at this point in time, I'm not going to get too obsessed about the fixture, other than the fact the clean sheet is more likely. I'm probably just happy enough with knowing that DEFCON points will drip feed through across the season for players that are pretty good on those. So yeah, I won't like bench Tarkowski in particular if I had him against Arsenal any more than I would against a Burnley just for the DEFCONs. Or the reverse, sorry. I would still back the clean sheet against Burnley, of course, and then hope that the DEFCONs come in too, because it's still maybe not quite as likely, but it's very close to as likely in that fixture as it would be against an Arsenal, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. So basically, what I've done is I've looked at DEFCONs per start over the last year, and worked out through from Mitchell worked out for a possible distribution the potential possible extra points. Don't worry about that. It's just the possible extra points based on the DEFCON contributions, and then worked out an increase from the 24-25 total to get this table. I'm not going to go through them all, but a few things to note. One, lots of really uber and fashionable picks in here. Mavropanos, for example, Sam, coming in, to Debo, all these sorts of guys. Kilman, Totti from Wolves, Tete. Defenders who do the defending for the most part are actually part of this to some extent. I think the key thing for me, really, looking at this, is Neco Williams in sixth, ahead of Viner, who's not in the top 20 in terms of DEFCONs per start. And obviously got Murillo kind of up there. He actually gets more than Milenkovic, and I think that's quite decent for a player who also has some semblance of attacking threat. Speak about him in a minute. The other thing is that you've got Van Dijk of the top teams. He's the only one of the top teams in top 20. Neco, Robinson and Munoz are the only three sort of wing backs who all seem to get a decent amount of DEFCON per start of the players who played over 1,000 games. I think this was also at least 20 starts last year.
Yeah, so Munoz is one that stands out for me because you wouldn't expect him to rank highly on the DEFCONs per start, but he does actually get a little bump from that as well, on top of being a very attacking wing back, effectively playing right wing at times for Palace. So really like the look of him. Williams, obviously, like you said, 0.5 cheaper than Murillo or Milenkovic. I think that's really good value for money. But outside of that, it is mainly the centre backs, which we all kind of know instinctively that they are the ones who get the clearances, and the clearances are the most valuable part of the DEFCON. That's the most predictable element that you can probably eyeball a defender and kind of just know instinctively or intuitively that they will be quite good on the DEFCONs. And centre backs tend to get a lot more clearances than wing backs do, because wing backs tend to progress with the ball rather than just hoofing it up the pitch. So yeah, some good options there. I think we'll see a lot more centre backs in our sides this season. And people online, just anecdotally, I've seen quite a lot of people saying, oh, who cares? It's only 2 extra points. It's not. It's 2 extra points in 30-40% of the matches across the season. That can accumulate to something like 30-40 extra points in some cases. That's the equivalent of if a defender got an extra like 10 to 12 assists a season, which is a Trent Alexander-Arnold at his very, very best. So on top of clean sheets, on top of any attacking returns they might get as well, DEFCONs are going to be really important to take note of and really analyze. And it's not something that you can necessarily predict when they'll come, but if you hold on to defenders long enough and you can pick the defenders that are going to get the DEFCON points, they'll drip feed in and you'll be a lot better off for it come the end of the season.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely the right thing to do. It almost feels like kind of back in the old days when you used to say, look at defenders as a unit and don't be making transfers around them, because over time it'll all sort of add up. And this is just another way that those centre backs who were much more reliant on clean sheets rather than goals, because the myth of the bullet header, I think we looked into it maybe your first year or maybe the year before with Lucy, and it was like literally like one every kind of 12 games or something like that on average when the bullet header actually happened. Sweet when it does, but it's not as likely. But having those centre backs in for the clean sheets and just kind of leaving them there over the course of the season, especially when they're cheap, is absolutely fantastic. And looking at defenders up to 5 million, overall ranking, the index includes DEFCON and also includes XGI. We've got the likes of Lacroix, Neco Williams, Mikolenko, Robinson, and Aina making up the top 5 in terms of their combined output inputs in terms of the combined outputs from the index, I suppose. And then you've got Rob T's clean sheet rating for the first 1 to 6. I do think that, doing this, I've been looking at it for the last few weeks. I do really think that Neco Williams is one of those players who has been kind of a big finding for me. I'm just like, okay, 5 million. I think that he's just such good value given the start that they've got, Forest. And in terms of the points per start last year at 3.9, Defcons per start over 10, and Rob T, him saying that they're kind of rating the top. They've got the top rating for amongst these cheap players, at least, for the first 6 fixtures. I really like him, and I think he's just one that I put in after kind of doing the data work myself and thought, yeah, okay, I'm very, very happy with that.
Yeah, don't disagree there whatsoever. He kind of ticks all of the boxes, which is rare for one of these defenders. I think in most cases, when you're doing this analysis, they at best tick 2 out of the 3, but he probably ticks all of them to a certain extent, and there's a bit of a unicorn for that reason. Good value. Didn't get as many starts as maybe we would have wanted last season, but it looks nailed in that lineup now. So I would imagine that he's going to be a good pickup in game week 1. The question for me is whether or not whether it's worth the shaving of 0.5 to sacrifice a Murillo or a Milenkovic, because Murillo is just insanely good when it comes to defcons, and Milenkovic is very good at getting those attacking returns. I think because that's less predictable, it makes me more tempted to just save the money and go for Williams to begin with. I think that's a sensible way of playing it, but I also, to be honest, all of the Nottingham Forest defensive options are good. Aina's probably the one that stands out as like the weak one, and any of the others I could get on board with.
Well, I mean, Williams actually has better defcon per start than Milenkovic. He's equal.
Yeah, no, I know.
90,
yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those things where it kind of just throws to the fore in some individual players. I completely get what you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. It's just like
I meant Murillo on defcon.
Oh yeah.
Milenkovic is lower but has the goal threat.
That's it. Okay. Yeah. But again, he's not actually that far behind Murillo. I think so. 1. I mean, that's really kind of a riz of the paper, isn't it, between the two of them? Elsewhere, I think 4.5s. This brings out Gahey being the best 4.5 overall. If we're thinking about kind of leaving 1 for the course of the season, he's in his last year's contract to Palace. There may be something that happens, so keep an eye on that. But you've got those unfashionable picks, Kilman, Anderson coming into the picture. The one big one though is probably Wan-Bissaka. He's got the highest ownership currently in terms of the live game of the 4.5s, and it seems to be justified by the Sam to some extent. I mean, we got decent points per start last year, a decent-ish amount of defcon, a decent-ish amount of attacking threat. I mean, we're not looking at very much. I mean, the top scorer amongst the 4.5s to 5s who was around last year was 0.18, who was Luca Dean, who do not go there. Just don't touch me.
Just don't do it yourself.
And ladies and other people. But yeah, certainly. I don't know. He's the most popular one. I can see why. Put it that way.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think he ticks a lot of boxes, and the back end of last season will go somewhere as to like reinforcing that feeling in our minds, even before the prices came out, even before we started being able to make drafts. Wan-Bissaka was in my thinking because he had such a good back end to last season, was getting forward, was scoring a couple of goals. The data's not too bad, and yeah, we kind of got that feeling he was coming in at 4.5 as well. He doesn't rank too badly on defcons. Good opening fixture. Yeah, I don't mind him. I think the only thing against him and West Ham picks generally is historically they're a pretty poor defense, and you wouldn't expect too many clean sheets. But with a full preseason with Potter, they might tighten up a little bit. It's possible. So I wouldn't discount him. He rotates really well with. Oh, which team is it? I can't remember now.
I saw that as well. Oh god. Anyway, but there's
is it?
a rotation out there.
Yeah, it's with Villa. It's with Villa. And with Konza, for instance. So for just 9 million, you've got a good rotation pairing that tends to work pretty nicely. The only problem with Konza is he's actually quite poor on the defcons, contrary to maybe a lot of people's instincts. He ranks pretty lowly. One player I've got my eye on is Richards at Palace. If Gahey goes 4.5 as well, gets very close to that 10 per start on the defcons, and might even go up slightly if Gahey does go. But yeah, I think Anderson as well, great on the DEFCONs. I've got my eye on him. He's actually in my current draft. And yeah, there's some good value to be had at 4.5 million across the board.
Yeah, certainly is. A quick note, and it's been mentioned in the chat as well. Senesi, Senesai, I don't know which way you pronounce that, is the best, is third best for DEFCONs, less below 5 million. But he only had 13 starts, we didn't include him in this particular table, but he's definitely one to think about. The only other one, we mentioned Mikalenko, Everton has just signed a left back for Bayern Munich. He's only 19, so it's probably decent. A decent chance that Mikalenko continues. Anthony Robinson, you mentioned Anderson. Robinson, who is currently recovering from knee surgery, something I literally read about 10 minutes before we started. He came out with decent DEFCONs around 10. Ranks third in this part. So there's definitely just a lot of optionality around this area effectively. And so we're not going to go for every player, but safe to say that there are lots of different ways you can kind of play it, and it's really interesting to kind of just have a look effectively. I do think that a lot of players who are in teams for a particular reason. I don't know if there's any sort of magic bullet of a particular player that we've missed thus far. Is there some out there? I mean, in terms of the cheap players, you've got Goodmanson, Esteve, and Reynaldo at Sunderland, who are the three who seem to be the playing 4.0s that people are really sort of homing in on. But I mean, anyone else missing from this particular list? Because obviously it does feature last season's best players.
I don't think anyone really missing from the 5 million and unders. A quick shout out for Esteve. I think it's Esteve. Look, I'm not expecting him to be a starter at any point in our FPL sides, but if you need to rely on a 4.0 to come in at any point for a team that dominated the championship in terms of their defensive numbers and arguably, obviously, not doing quite as much defensive work, clearing the ball and such. Esteve hit about 8.7 on the DEFCONs per start in the championship. In the Premier League, their backs against the wall. I reckon he hits that DEFCON threshold more often than not. And a bit like we saw like a Bednarek or a Wout Faes last season getting up to past 100 points with like 40 of those being DEFCON. If Esteve can be in a better defense than either of them, and I think there's a good chance he is in a slightly better defense than either of them, gets one or two extra clean sheets, we might be looking at a 4.0 nailed defender who they value at something like 50 million. And he might be getting north of 100 points. So mainly due to that DEFCON. So it might just save you a transfer in a time of crisis. And that's why I'm hot on Esteve, because he looks nailed in. And if it's between starting him to get a 3-pointer with a couple of goals conceded and some DEFCON points, or taking a hit to bring in someone else, I quite like having him on the bench just to get that floor raised a little bit. So yeah, just wanted to shout that out quickly.
Yeah, they have lost Trafford though, as of today, so that's something to bear in mind. Sam Johnson, I think, is the man who they're looking to sign.
They're going down.
Dear me. Speaking of teams going down as well, if you are, sorry Leeds fans, but if you are looking to bench boost to game week 1, I think the Goodmanson at home to Everton on that first week. David Moyes, don't know if I heard on Guardian Football Weekly that he's been very grumpy in his press conferences, saying that he needs at least 6 or 7 new players for this season ahead, and so that could be quite a fun game week 1 kind of pick up for Goodmanson. He's going to be the nailed on left back by the sounds of it, with Firpo having left. But yeah, just a tidbit there. I don't know if you've done that justice, Sam. I've got no idea, but we've got to move on to the more premiums. 40 minutes in. Right, okay. Premium defenders. Van Dijk quite far ahead. If you look at combining factors of points per start, DEFCON per start, XG per 90, CS ratings, also the projected minutes. But 8 DEFCONs per start for Van Dijk means he's not guaranteed the 2 points every time. Like, no one is, but you know what I mean. He's mainly pulled up by the X-Mins and the opening clean sheet rating that Rob T gives of 2.1 clean sheets projected over the first 6 game weeks. And I think what that shows is that clean sheets are still what's important for the most expensive defenders. You have the likes of Gabriel, Saliba, and Gvardiol, who do feature in this list. But if you add in the 4.5s and the 5 millions, they do go down the list quite significantly. And I think that, if you look at a player like Gabriel, he doesn't feature as highly on the defcons as 5.8, something like that. Even Saliba, who you think, oh yeah, he's going to be quite good at those clearances, interceptions. Not really. I mean, 6.37. Compare that to Tarkovsky or a Murillo, like you mentioned earlier on 11. That's kind of just over half of their output per game. Comes down to kind of how that player tends to defend, how that team tends to defend, potentially, given talk about that point about how CBIT does tend to be incurred. And I think that, we shouldn't lose focus, as I said in the first pod back, on the importance of clean sheets for a lot of these kind of players within these elite teams.
Yeah, for sure. I was just about to say the same thing regarding Arsenal. And I think because neither of them ranked towards the very top of the points for defenders last season, obviously Saliba got fairly close. But it's maybe just given us a slightly warped perspective of just how good they are as a defense. They didn't keep as many clean sheets as we'd normally expect them to, but the data was still strong. If they can get back to getting 18, 19 clean sheets this season, which is by no means impossible, they can definitely do that. Gabriel and Saliba could rise to the top of these leaderboards without needing defcons. And okay, no, they won't get many defcons. I think Saliba would have gotten like 4 or 5 matches last season where he would have hit them. Gabriel even fewer than that. But if they're in a good enough defense that do keep enough clean sheets, significantly more than some of the other teams, which is possible, they are going to still be a pretty important pick during a good set of fixtures where you can rely or I guess, hope for more clean sheets. So Gabriel is one I'm still really interested in. I think he's still just getting back to full fitness at the moment. So Saliba is probably the safer bet. And those are the only 2 Arsenal defenders I'm interested in. I don't think we need to talk about the others because there's just so many options. And even at 0.5 cheaper, I'm not confident enough on any of them, to be very honest. But yeah, I have Virgil van Dijk ahead of the Arsenal defenders right now for the start.
Me too.
I think I've also got Gvardiol in that mix as well, where it would be between Gvardiol and an Arsenal defender to begin with. Interested to see where you might weigh that one up. Gvardiol, I think, will do slightly better on the defcons this year at centre back, but so. Yeah, I think maybe Gvardiol.
Lots of love for Van Dijk in the chat, and I kind of agree with that. I think I've got him kind of just. You mentioned earlier on that idea of kind of set and forget. It never happens. I think last year was the very first time I ever had a player who lost 38 game weeks was David Raya. But Van Dijk.
I might this year.
Yeah. Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's that blend, isn't there, of Min's clean sheets, everything with Van Dijk, which probably looks okay. Gvardiol, yes. He, Porro, and Munoz in reverse order got the best in terms of XGI per 90 for a defender last year, and you do wonder if Gvardiol being centre back could be better for everything, basically, if he is a centre back for the year ahead.
Yeah, Munoz, I mentioned earlier briefly, he's one of those kind of half unicorns, I suppose. Normal horse, I guess, if it's half a unicorn. But he 0.24 XGI per 90, very, very good. Weighted towards goal threat. I was waiting for you to laugh at that. I was really grateful you did.
Took a moment.
No, that's fine. Obviously, nailed in starting 37 games last season. Did well on the points per start, good on the goal threat, good on the defensive contributions. I think he hits all of the boxes. The only thing that's put me off is those starting fixtures. But at 5.5 million, there's an argument to just go with him from the off regardless, because he's effectively playing as a right winger who also gets the odd defensive contribution. I think he's really going to be a very good pick at that price point. Yeah, don't discount the Nottingham Forest defenders either, because they've got a great start to the season. It's just whether or not it's worth that 0.5 extra to pay for them over Neco Williams, as you've already talked up. It is interesting because we've just had in the chat about Frimpong as well. Like the fullbacks aren't non-options, but I think especially from the start, because a lot of them are new to the league. So Frimpong, obviously Kirkes is a new signing for Liverpool from Bournemouth. They've got rivals in those positions anyway. And then you've got Aït-Nouri at Man City. I think they'll all be great, but these picks, especially the centre backs towards the top of this sheet, I just feel like I've got more confidence in, and I know they're going to get 90 minutes. I know they're going to get the defensive contribution points. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just not really feeling the fullbacks just yet. Maybe after a few weeks, I'll change my mind though.
Frimpong's still kind of fairly popular, to speak to Goose's point. The only thing is, both the fact that you've got Conor Bradley there,
Yeah.
and you've also got, as you said, the unknown quantity thing versus the known quantity. And at the start of the year, I think that what it comes down to is that I'm always going to be favouring that. Maybe it's just I'm a product of the FPL review age nowadays, but that's why I kind of feel like I'm really kind of focus on starting there. If a player like Frimpong does start going gangbusters, it probably won't be kind of a high enough effective ownership straight up for that to be something that's going to worry me. And then we kind of take it from there. I know that sounds a bit naive potentially to some people, but I mean that would be the way that I'd look at it potentially. And
I agree. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
It's weird, isn't it? The Forest defenders, a couple of kind of mentions in the chat about the fact that they're going to have an increased workload this year, which may kind of do down their overall sort of potential. Milenkovic, Murillo, doing all right in the underlying sort of number. I think Milenkovic has got, I don't know who's got the best ownership of the two of them actually. One of them, I'm sure I saw had a fairly decent ownership. Might have been Aina actually.
Who's fairly low at the moment.
Yeah,
I think so. The others.
Yeah, I think it's Aina who was up there. Sorry, I thought I saw it was Murillo was up there. I think it's one of those, isn't it, where like you treat it like the first kind of few weeks as kind of like just a bit of a freebie, a free pass. It's not a free pass, but a free pass in terms of there not being other competitions sort of impinging on your expectations of minutes. Those sorts of things luckily do start to come in a tiny bit later, so you do have a couple of weeks. I think is it 3 or 4 weeks until the Champions League starts, Sam? I'm not entirely sure this time round, but you've got a little bit of time before that does start to kick in, so it's something that I don't quite think about just at the start of the year, maybe to my disbenefit. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I think with European fixtures, I mean, by the way, Forest might have a playoff, I think, very early. I think it's between game weeks 2 and 3. There's a home away playoff, possibly. I know there's some stuff going on with Palace and the lawsuit and, all of that stuff. But anyway, regardless of that, I think first half of the season, even if they are playing some European fixtures in midweek, they're still fairly fresh from preseason. They're still fairly fresh from that break. So I wouldn't worry about it too much to begin with. It's more when we start approaching Christmas, when we get to November, December, that's where I'd probably worry about that a little bit more. The other thing is centre-backs don't clock up the same amount of miles. They don't have to turn as quickly. They don't you see a player like a Van Dijk hitting 37 starts in the Premier League last season, despite Champions League. And the same with a lot of these players as well. Gvardiol in there, Saliba, obviously Gabriel did eventually get injured, but a lot of these players who play those central roles are able to start most of the games regardless of how often they come and how many European games they also have to play. So less worried about players like Murillo and Milenkovic, maybe a little bit more on a Neco Williams, but I don't think it's a factor for the first few game weeks. I think they're fit enough and they're fresh from preseason that we'll probably see it coming a bit later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone that we haven't mentioned, we didn't mention Porro, who's got a very good start of the fixture. Same kind of thing applies about Slanky, about the fixtures being fairly good over time. As I mentioned, second best XGI per 90 last year. And then Kukurea, who's actually, apart from Mike Nori, who we should also mention, one of the higher owned fullbacks, or whatever you might call those in modern football these days, out there. Ait Nori is one of those who I'm a little bit unsure of. I'm not sure I'll kind of start with him. Kukurea, I think, is one of those that obviously did score 5 goals last year. I think his XG was kind of around sort of 2 or 3, but still kind of is fairly popular, especially given Chelsea's opening sort of few fixtures. I can see why people are interested there, Sam. And both of those players, I think, shouldn't be ignored, right?
No, definitely don't ignore. I mean, Kukurea was someone I was interested in picking from the off when I first saw Chelsea's fixtures. It doesn't rank great on the DEFCON, and the underlying attacking data's not as good as I actually thought it would be, considering how far forward you see him with the eye test last season. I expected it to be maybe a little bit higher. I do think he'll be a factor at some point. I just want as many as much of a high floor as possible to begin with, and I think I can get that high floor out of other 6.0s rather than Kukurea to begin with. But yeah, both of them, Kukurea, Ait Nuri, the Liverpool fullbacks as well, at times this season, especially for isolated fixture runs where you can go after attacking returns in tandem with clean sheets, I think will be really interesting. But I'm really trying not to give myself too many transfers to make in my backline at the start of the season. So those nailed 90-minute men with the DEFCON baseline that builds them up a little bit is probably the way I'm going to personally be going from the off.
Yeah, I'm feeling like we've got a floor versus ceiling discussion to come on the final pod of the preseason. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Moving on to goalkeepers. I've been a bit naughty, I've got to say, and I've used Kepa or Flecken as baseline kind of projections for Petrovic and Kelleher to try to get some idea of
That's
an
fair.
index based on points per start, saves per start, XGC per 90, and those team projections again. I looked at it, Sam, and I realised that, hey, you know what? If I was looking for a 5.0 midfield defender, goalkeeper, I'd get Sells. Otherwise, I just I've got Verbruggen and Petrovic at the moment in my team. If I'm looking, if I've got like a bench boost draft just sitting around, I haven't really looked at it too much. Well, not loads at least. And they're probably the two I'd be the most interested in. But the 4.5s are all a bit rubbish. Well played towers, basically. Petrovic's Bournemouth fixtures really improved after game week 1. You kind of leave him in there after that, and Verbruggen's got an okay start. Trafford, as I mentioned earlier on, has taken on one of the City's 5.0. I don't know. It kind of feels like, I think Lazy FPL put it quite well, that the goalkeeper's the one that you shove in afterwards after you've worked everything else out. Last year, I think there was definitely more sort of, because of the way the fixtures fell. We were both kind of quite interested. I think you got me interested in Raya very early on, and the more I looked at it, the more it made sense. This year, I'm kind of back to kind of my default of being as unbothered about goalkeepers as ever. It's just, if you throw in, and we'll speak about this in a couple of weeks, the bench boost 1 potential, that's when I kind of start thinking, okay, maybe there's something, the 4.5s, but there's not loads, is there, really, at all? 4.0 is total dead zone, unfortunately. And yeah, my take on goalkeepers is that it's the last thing that I come to, really. Don't want to end the pod on that, because that would be rubbish. We're going to do midfielders last, because that's like ending with a flourish.
Yeah,
I'm very I just feel like I'm not too bothered about the keeper almost. I just kind of throw in the 4.5s that make the most sense. Or if I don't bench boost, I'll throw in Sells, and that'll be it.
Yeah, it is very well priced, because every keeper that I want is just 0.5 more than I'd want them to be. And I think that's correct. That is exactly, like, I would really want Sanchez if he was 4.5. I'd really want Pickford if he was 5 million. I'd really want Raya if he was 5 million. I'd really want Sells if he was 4.5. They're all just a little bit too expensive. But I'm currently falling down on the side that it's worth paying the extra 0.5 for the 5 million. I quite like Sanchez. I would go Sells, and he was in my first draft. But the more I look at the Forest defenders, the more I think there's a higher floor that can be gathered from those defenders than going with the Sells.
Yeah, okay.
So I think Sells gets you the clean sheets that the Forest defenders would. But I think every week you're like bleeding a couple of points from either defensive contributions or the odd attacking return, and it might just start frustrating you. The player that I'm falling with at the moment is Sanchez, because outside of Cucurella, who doesn't get DEFCON points and might get the odd attack and return, but it's not a weekly occurrence, Sanchez does cover you off of the clean sheet. They do have decent fixtures for a long stretch. In fact, all the way through to game week 13, which is looking like quite a nice wildcard window if you can hold on that long. I quite like Sanchez. Now, obviously, Sanchez, if you're bench boosting game week 1, is quite expensive.
Yep.
I still think I might do it, even if I'm bench boosting. I just don't love any of the 4.5s at all, and I can just see myself getting really frustrated with any sort of rotation. Petrovic maybe, but they've already lost Kirkes. They've lost Howson, Hoyston. Yep. They're losing Zabani by the looks of it. So it's going to be a completely new backline with a new keeper, obviously, as well. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. And Kelleher as well, it's a similar problem. Like, okay, you've lost the keeper. Arguably, it's an upgrade to Kelleher in the first place. But you've lost your manager. You've lost your assistant manager, who's really highly rated. You've lost your captain. You've lost your talisman, which, okay, maybe doesn't affect too much on the keeper. But if you're not as good going forwards, maybe you're absorbing a bit more pressure at the back. I don't love Kelleher either. I'm Verbruggen maybe, but Brighton concede on a weekly basis anyway, and their underlying defensive data is not great. Like,
yeah, I think
you're so uninspired.
Your quandary just shows exactly what a good job they've done. Honestly,
yeah.
I think that kind of, I think it's literally just Wan-Bissaka. that I look at and think that should have been 0.5. Him and Bowen actually should have been 0.5 different either way. The rest of it, of the players who are currently in kind of the consideration set, I just think, yeah, you've done a good job at making us have to make decisions here. Let's move on to midfielders. So with Siebert here, I did the same as defenders. I looked at the clearances, blocks, interceptions, recoveries, and tackles for last year, created the ratio based on the total number. And for midfielders, it's all about recoveries. And again, it seems to be there's not too much correlation in terms of nature of position. It's more about the individual player. And the DEFCON rankings for them makes interesting reading. I took out basically any player who hadn't played more than 20 games. Yarmoliuk at Bournemouth came out as the best DEFCON plus starter. That was taken off because he had a ridiculous amount of DEFCONs. I'm not sure why. But similar for defenders, in terms of DEFCON, the midfielders doing the most defending seems to get the most DEFCONs. Shock horror, but also highlights how over-focusing on this metric can really lead you down the wrong path, as you said with defenders. Like goals and assists are still really important, and this is something which is a bit of a supplement, and it kind of really impacts the kind of midfielder 4 or 5 in your team. Because if you look at the DEFCONs in terms of DEFCON per start, as is shown on YouTube here, all you basically see is it dominated all the way up to number 20, which is Bruno Fernandes, of players who are between 4.5 and 5.5. And yeah, it brings a few interesting names to the fore, like Elliot Anderson's been spoken about a lot, Belabor, Garner Gay, all of these individuals. But, and that's the kind of the beauty of the DEFCONs, but I'm not going to get too sort of caught up in it. The only one who does fit in that sort of gold log zone, as I mentioned, is Bruno Fernandes in 20th. He'd have got 27 extra points by my calculations or so last year, which would put him in the 200 club. But he will be the centre midfielder this year for Man United. He'll be playing in centre midfield. We won't play number 10 anymore with Cunha and Bumo there. So there's got to be moderation about how excited we get. I was very excited at the start about Bruno potentially being a monster. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I don't know. I'm not as convinced as I was before. This is where you say Bruno's going to be in your team all season, isn't it?
Not quite all season, I don't think, because I don't think I'll have him game week 1. But I love him. I don't think him withdrawing to a more of a centre midfielder role rather than a cam role is that bad for him. I don't think it's something that would put me off of him later in the season. We've seen him take a more withdrawn role in isolated moments previously, and it's never seemed to affect him that badly. As long as he keeps penalties, which is definitely up for debate. If he loses penalties, I think that it doesn't completely kill him as an asset, but it really takes a dent out of his potential. If he keeps penalties at 9 million, I'm still interested, regardless of whether he's cam or just a normal central midfielder. Also, purely because he's playing with better players in front of him now. Like if he's got Cunha, he's got Mbermo, maybe, who knows, a Sesko or a Watkins up in front of him, someone can actually convert his chances that he creates and puts on a plate for them this year. I still think he's a great option. And like you said, he's in that golden zone where he can serve a bit of a dual purpose, especially if he's a CM. He's going to have to make more recoveries, so he might be even better on the DEFCONs this season if he is playing a more withdrawn role. So yeah, it doesn't put me off of him whatsoever. I just on the last sheet as well, I think I noticed, was it Gomez? That I think the 4.5 Gomez is the defender Gomez, and Joao Gomez is 5.5, right? Oh, sorry, you're muted, Tom.
It's the wrong Gomez. I'm very sorry to the Adams family.
Okay, right. I was just looking at that. I was like, have I got that right, or have I just missed that there's a really cheap Gomez that gets great? Okay, that makes me good, because otherwise, if I hadn't been recommending him, I'd feel really awful. Okay, yeah. So he's 5.5. He could be interesting. Belabor I like at 5. Christie, with Cook out for a while, looks like a good option, and that for me is like my. If I'm going with a 3-4-3, that 5th midfielder, I really like as one of those DEFCON players who can just sit first on your bench most weeks. Doesn't look very exciting, but it raises that floor if you ever need to rely on them. The problem with a 3-5-2 is you'd need to start them every single week. And if it's a 3-4-3, you might need to find another good striker. But in a 3-5-2, again, there aren't really any cheap strikers, 5 and under, that even play. So that's what's I think the DEFCON thing for midfielders is guiding me towards a 3-4-3 for that reason, that I like the 5s and the 5.5 millions as that first bench enabler that kind of just raises the floor in a time of crisis. You can bring them off the bench and you know they're going to get you 4 or 5 points with the odd attacking return.
I agree with you. So if you look at defenders who are 6 or less in terms of the overall rankings, yeah, your Casado, your Anderson. Anderson's a DEFCON king by a fair way. I think it's Dominguez. Nottingham Forest is kind of 23 starts. He was just a bit higher. And maybe Adams as well at Bournemouth actually was just a little bit higher as well. But I think in terms of the solid starts, he was the man there. Not much going on in terms of the XG open 0.19, but that's kind of the story for most of these players are around sort of 6-ish. The only one that I would pick out is Mikael Damsgaard at 6.0 at Brentford. 10.97 DEFCONs per start last year. 0.31 XGI per 90, but not the best start. And as you said, there's lots going on at Brentford. A rookie manager in place, losing Bumo, probably maybe losing Visser as well. So things shifting all around him. I'm just not sure that I'd be particularly interested in kind of putting him in right now. He and Tielemans, I think, are probably the main sort of standouts in terms of players who aren't kind of overtly defensive in terms of the midfielders who are less than 6. T2K in the chat just mentioned that Tielemans also has some pens, which is something that could
potentially
also be
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Bit of a graveyard in 4.5s, but I quite like it. I quite like the fact that these players are all players who we are talking about, all the way down to Camera at Villa, who just signed a really sort of lucrative contract for the last few years. He's just kind of below Adams on the list of the top 20. And, there are all these players who are really valid picks for probably in a 3-4-3, the 5th man. Effectively, I mean,
exactly
you floated that last week, didn't you? Saying that Anderson would be like your 5th player who plays some games, not play other games, and that really helps. I think to have a 5 million like a Christie or a Belabor hanging out.
Yeah, completely agree. That's why I think a 3-4-3 could be a bit underutilized. I'm seeing a lot of 3-5-2s with like a strong midfield 5, and I'm currently toying around with that myself. But it just leaves you with that really cheap, quite poor striker on your bench that you just can't play. Whereas with a lot of these, you can rely on them if you need to, because the floor is a lot higher and they're not the most exciting blockbuster picks, but what they will do is trickle points every single week. And if you ever need them, they can come on even against like an Arsenal away from home and get you 4 points. And that is absolutely fine. It saves you from needing to take a hit, because most weeks you can't easily find a player that's going to get you that 8 points to pay off the -4 over one of these picks. So I think they're well priced. Zubimendi, obviously been mentioned in the chat as well. He could be interesting on the defensive contributions. I was just running the numbers before this pod on Zubimendi's defensive contributions previously. Not that high, but not so low that he wouldn't get any. So yeah, it could be an option. Arsenal don't do a ton of defending like on the ball, and I don't imagine you need to get too many recoveries though. So maybe not top of my pile, but interesting to see what happens there. I know Rodri we're going to probably talk about in the next section though at 6.5, who might be a bit of a cheat code too, right?
Yeah, a bit of tidying up here as well. So you mentioned Zubimendi, Baby Reinders, another player who could feature here, but probably one that we were not going to be jumping into immediately. We don't really know the start. A bit of an Foot Manager hero, if anyone's ever played that and owned him. He's very, very good in that. Doniel Marlon, for XG per 90 amongst this group, if you did include him, a decent amount of minutes. Could be one to look at in the price bracket. No Rashford there anymore, no Asensio there anymore. Probably owed a big favour, but Emery, after shunting him out of the Champions League squad last year, could be a really interesting pickup. And you mentioned John Arias at Wolves as well at 5.5. A bit of Club World Cup related excitement, I think, with him. I don't know too much about him, but he again could be quite a good one. But I think the Man City game first up is we're going to dent some interest in him. Moving up to 6.5 to 8. Quite a lot going on, and equally quite a lot of we don't knows because Bumo coming out way on top, Sam. Obviously one of those players who, if we said at Brentford and stayed at 8, we'd be like, well, okay. In you go, man. That United, is it the case that we're not as sure as we were before?
Yeah, not to begin with. Same with Cunha as well for me. I think give them a watching brief, see if one of them takes penalties off of Bruno. I think Cunha actually might. It's possible, considering he's quite a mercurial, selfish in a good way kind of player. I can see him swiping them off of Bruno. So maybe, but yeah, I think both of them overperformed their data last season. That doesn't mean they're bad picks this year, by the way. That overperformance does happen, and it might be a mark that they're very good finishers. But in a new team, in a slightly new system where they're not going to be the main man, and I mean that from a bonus point of view as just as much as in terms of on the pitch. Bruno is very good on the bonus points. Cunha is, and Burmo's not bad either. But in their individual sides, when they were all separated, they were all absolutely farming bonus points every single time they got any attacking returns. I think we can say bye to that to an extent because they're now all in the same team and they can't all be getting 3 bonus points every single match. So it does dent their appeal a little bit, removing penalties, maybe removing some set pieces, removing the fact that they're talisman, like all of these factors go against them. And I just, not from the start, not with those fixtures for the first 4 or 5 game weeks. Let's come back to them, I think. And at 8 million, if they go up 0.1, 0.2 because they get off to a hot start, I'm happy to pay the extra to know that they're getting 90 minutes on penalties, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think Declan Rice needs to mention here.
Yeah.
He's been in my team actually since quite early on. So I'm not saying that I've been sat there tinkering with it forever, and he's been like one of the mainstays. But I would note that over the end, the second half of last season, he had a better non-pen XGI than likes of Brendan Johnson, Rashford, Kudus, etc. Was matching Morgan Rogers near enough on set pieces, and wonder if he might be of interest now he's playing perceivably the pure 8 role with Zubmendi in. I've got him 6th overall here in the price bracket in terms of decent-ish def cons. I mean, you're approaching 10 per game, which is good. In with a decent chance of that. Points over the course of the season, I think you're looking kind of 0.38, something like that. Over the course of the back end of last season on the set pieces I mentioned, and also Arsenal have got a decent goal production according to Rob T over the first 6 games. And yeah, I think at that price I really like him. And Szoboszlai as well is worth mentioning too. Had a very decent XGI penalty total last year. It was a 0.47. It was only Cunha, Eze, Sarr and Bumo, so I swapped those 2 over, who were above him in terms of that expected goal involvement. And obviously they've got a very good kind of early projection going on. I really like both of those picks actually. I feel like they're two picks who could feature in that sort of Goldilocks zone. More so Rice because he's in that DEFCON per start of kind of nearing 10. Sam, I know he needs to get 12 midfielders, so he's not going to get there every week. But one of those players who could, especially if the emphasis more for him is now he's going to be playing that number 8 role, and we know that that's kind of the main contributors. I don't know. It's one that's worth thinking about, but one that I'm definitely thinking of is kind of like a player who sort of straddles that sort of defensive-minded midfielder thing and the cheapies, but he's got a little bit of added extra with the set pieces and also long shot.
Yeah, I like him. I think maybe a little bit of context is required on the DEFCONs as well, though. So if he is playing purely that 8 role, the DEFCONs probably don't get quite as high as they would have if he was in the 6 because he won't recover the ball so often. But yeah, I think at 6.5 million, that's a fair price. He is still going to get the odd DEFCON. He's got good underlying data for a player that historically we would have considered as a CDM. Yeah, he's snuck into a couple of different manifestations of a draft for me as well, especially if I'm looking at bench boosting, because Arsenal are a team that I'd probably favour more if I was bench boosting in game week 1, and free hitting in 3 or 6, I think it was. So yeah, Rice is in the window for me as one of the 6.5s I quite like the look of. Szoboszlai and McAllister would be if they hadn't have signed Florian Wirtz, but because they have, unless they start playing with 12 players every single week, I think they're both going to be too risky. McAllister had a great season last year, by the way, so I think it's more likely that Szoboszlai loses his place than McAllister does.
Agreed.
So I think that unfortunately just ruins him as an FPL asset. I don't think we can go there. I don't think the minutes will be good enough, which is a shame because, like you said, good underlying attacking data there as well. But yeah, I think Rice, Rodri, I'm very intrigued by. I think if you ran the 23-24 numbers, he did overperform his underlying attacking data by quite a lot.
That's the big one, yeah.
It is a big one, but he got, like, even if he can get half of those attacking returns, he got 18, by the way, that year. If he can get 9 or 10, which is perfectly feasible, and he's a 90-minute man, he would have gotten something like 40 or 36 defensive contribution points as well. He would have been really close to a 200-point club member that year. Even with fewer attacking returns, he's still hitting like 150, 160. So that could be an option, but I think we need to know that he's fully fit and going to get 90, which he quite easily might not at the start of the season, considering the length of that injury layoff.
The one that I did look at that, Sam, and the one that I saw, João Paulinho was just an absolute demon that year.
Yeah,
Like, that
if
is
he comes
deep
back to
play. If
Fulham.
he comes back, I think he's being linked to all sorts of clubs at the moment. I think it's Spurs he's been linked to most recently.
Yeah,
Like, if
Fulham
he
I
comes
saw
back,
today as well, by the way.
ooh, he's going to be he's an absolute monster at this, honestly, and
Yeah.
you can kind of guess exactly why. I'm glad you mentioned McAllister, actually, because I was going to kind of just say that he's a very good analog for Rice in terms of the defcons per star. He's got a few more. He's actually nudging 12. He rounded up as 10.63. Similar XGI penalty across the season. Also got the goal projections. Also, I mean, there's loads of penalties taken. Now Liverpool reverts also in the picture, but also potentially do that, and does take some set pieces as well. So I think that he could sneakily be quite a decent pickup. Moving slightly up the price bracket, Mr. Rogers at 7, Sam. One of those that, because I've become more attracted to Ollie Watkins, he's a beautiful man, I've become less attracted to Morgan Rogers. He's also a beautiful man. It's just that I kind of feel like I don't want them both, and I kind of feel like if I've got that midfield slot free for other individuals, then I kind of want Watkins to be there, if that makes sense. So, as I mentioned earlier on when I spoke about Watkins, I think the fixtures are very good for him and very good for Villa generally. But I can see why there's lots of interest in Rogers. Totally get it. And no defcons, decent-ish at open 90, decent-ish fixtures. He's one of those that potentially is a bit of a hangover from last year. In some ways, I'm saying that as a devil's advocate rather than being somebody who's saying that he doesn't like Rodgers, because I do. And I think there's probably a good chance that he's in the conversation for my team towards the end.
Yeah, I think it's that Villa coverage that I want, and Watkins isn't the easiest to get into the draft. I want to find a way to build a draft with Watkins that I like, but given that Watkins himself is subject to transfer speculation, Rodgers feels like the really nailed, really safe, if a little bit boring pick. I think 7 million is a completely fair price. It's not underpriced. It's not overpriced. 37 Premier League starts last year, pretty much 90-minute man every single week. The data isn't fantastic, but it was his first full season in the league. And I wonder if we should expect that to maybe start improving as he gets a bit older. I think you can logically or reasonably expect it to sort of tick over 0.4 this season. I think that would be absolutely fair. Do not expect any defensive contribution points from him whatsoever. He's a dribbler with the ball. He progresses the ball. He does not win the ball. They leave that to their defensive mids. So don't expect that. But if you can get another 15 to 20 attacking returns this season at 7 million, I think that's probably fine. And we're not picking these players all for the entire season either. And they've got a good stretch of fixtures for the first 7 or 8 game weeks. So I think if that helps you cover off the Villa attack, and I hate the idea of covered, by the way. I don't think it's you don't have Watkins, so you must have Rodgers to cover off the attacking returns. But if there's a certain amount of goals that Villa score, and Rodgers can be involved in a net 30% of them, then I think that's a good enough exposure to the Villa attack, especially considering that his fitness and injury record's very, very good, and he plays 90 minutes most weeks as well. So I think it's a fair price. But what I will say is that I wouldn't just automatically put him in my team without looking at the Bournemouth mids. I think 7 million for Semenyo and Kluivert is more than reasonable, and they both have good underlying attacking data with a bit more goal threat than Rodgers does. And once that Liverpool fixture's out of the way, I think a load of people are being put off by that first game week 1 game. After that, it's a great run. And both of them, I think, are massively overlooked right now.
Yeah, if you have Mr. Semenyo, you are kind of just buying a ticket for the lottery that he's gonna take 3 or 4 shots per game. Like that's just the basic. And I really, really like the idea of just kind of saying, right, okay, there you go, Semenyo. You have Liverpool as a free pass, and then after that, you're in my team, good to go. I think that as you said, the underlying numbers are good. The minutes are crucially very, very good. So if you give a player more minutes, more chances to shoot, you're likely over time to get more goals scored. See also Mohamed Salah, who was a great example of this in the early days of FPL, of his time in the Premier League. So yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's just one of the things I think is kind of moderated by your intention to bench boost or not a lot of the time. Because if you're not going to bench boost in game week 1, then that's something that's, if you're not planning to kind of do something where you've got to make those transfers or wild card in game week 2, he's the sort of player that you think, okay, I'm happy to watch and wait on it. But yeah, I really like that as a pickup. Elsewhere, Kudus at the very bottom of this list is very, very popular at the moment. I think it's fair to say, Sam. I'm not so sure he's popular in the underlying numbers in terms of the TS. Yeah, but he's a player I'm seeing in many, many drafts and nudging 30% overall in terms of the pickups. I mean, what do you make of him? He's currently in my team, but I think that was kind of the last time I looked at it was kind of on Friday or something. I think I sent you the team yesterday just ahead of this, but last time I looked at it was on Friday, and I was just after the Slanky injury in inverted commas. Like, if I do get Slanky, I wouldn't have Kudus because I'm covering Sam. You know how much I'm covering things. But yeah, no, and I think that it's one of those where I can see why people are excited at that price, and I think he did all right last year in terms of the underlying data, and he's quite a mercurial character, isn't he? And Spurs do have those good fixtures, so yeah, quite popular. What do you think?
I mean, I got heat for this already, and I'm always open to changing my mind. I'm also not saying he's a bad player. I love him. I think he's a fantastic actual player. I just don't get the hype as an FPL pick yet. I think we're way off of having that confidence level on him. The data's not great. He doesn't get defensive contribution points. We don't know if he's going to be a 90-minute man. We don't even necessarily know whether he's going to play in the positions we want him to. Thomas Frank could get the best out of him, and he could be an absolutely sensational pick. But these are all coulds and what ifs, and he won't have penalties. We don't know if he's got set pieces. There's just so many options in that Spurs midfield as well that could take minutes off of him, even if he starts every game. I think the fact that it's Burnley game week 1 is the thing that's tempting everyone, but I'm just not sold on it at this point in time. I'm more than happy to change my mind on him after a few game weeks time once we've got that set of data that we're maybe a little bit more confident in. And if it proves that he is a 90-minute man who's got some set pieces and he's got better data now he's at Spurs, which I think is likely, then fine. But to begin with, I'd prefer the penalty taker who is getting 90 minutes a game with also a decent promoted club in game week 1 who I've got, although the data's not very good, because he's got the penalties, because I know the minutes are good, I'd prefer to go for Ndai to begin with. I just think that's the safer pick that has less that could, or a lower chance of it going wrong, put it that way.
Yeah, Mark said in the chat, Kudus feels like this season's in Kunki. I mean, one of those that I agree with you as a baller when you watch him play. He and
he's very similar player.
Yeah, it's a bit of an Eze for me in some ways. That he's very sort of eye catching, isn't he? It's just how that translates into end products.
Yeah, the difference is Eze's data is actually good.
Yeah, especially when the sun shines. Dear me, I think if you looked at Eze game week 19 to 38 versus 1 to 18, you get a very different story, wouldn't you?
Sure. Yes.
But hey, I mean, it could be the new next Arsenal signing. So obviously, I love the guy. In terms of other players who are not on this list, or we kind of need to discuss, Madueke and Elanga have moved Madueke to Arsenal for all that money, the bad optics, etc. and Elanga to Newcastle. Elanga was a very big overperformer actually at the end of last year in terms of his GNA versus underlying. Madueke, we will need to see one of those players who has flashed hot and cold, but I think there's definitely a player in there. Elanga, you have to think is probably going to be a starter, Sam, but the fixtures probably don't lend themselves to that. And Madueke feels very much a kind of just wait and see, cheeky points. I think people are buying him just so they can say that at some point. But for me, probably a bit of a leave. Gittins to Chelsea as well was good, but inconsistent at Dortmund. I mean, I think that kind of rounds off that bit a little bit. And to finish, those big ass midfielders, there's actually only 6 of them within this table. I've included Marmoush, even though he's only started 14 games, just because I mean it's probably worth doing. And we've got Florian Wirtz as the new kid. So Mo Salah, Sam. Is he any good? No, let's not do that. Let's not do that at all. I think that Salah, we don't need to talk about his data. I think the only thing is, as we kind of started to dig into with Haaland, is whether if you would put him as a pick versus Haaland if you can get both of them in your team. I think that Salah's going to be the comfortably the popular game week 1 captain. And it's very much, do you want to take a risk against a proven player like that? Do I have the stomach to do that this year? I'm in the hunt for a good year, so probably not. Are you of similar mind, or are you thinking, you know what, I'm going to go for it?
I heard a great bit of advice on a good video from FPL Harry earlier on. You can't win FPL in the first few game weeks, but you can sure as hell lose it.
Oh, not that again. He said that on my pod many years ago.
I know, it's his favorite quote. It's his favorite quote. It's one to remember though. Like, okay, Salah, there will come a season where he's not the best FPL option. There will. Eventually he will fall off. It might be this season. It's absolutely possible. And even if it's not this season, if he drops off 20 or even 10%, he's not as good as he was last year. There's an argument to go against him at some point. But are you willing to take that bet in game week 1? I'm not, I don't think, because I think there's more chance that it goes wrong and blows up in my face and gives me quite a few problems, potentially even a wild card to sort out that problem, and a fair few points down as well, considering the ownership's going to be very high. I'm confident he still is good enough that it's worth picking him and worth captaining him and finding the edges elsewhere. And if it proves over the first few game weeks that he is slightly off it, or maybe the potential signing of Isak disrupts things slightly and he gets goal share off of him, or Wirtz ends up taking a bit more goal share than you'd expect, then we can juggle more easily moving away from him than getting to him, having lost out on those points. So I think it's safer to be in the camp that is backing Salah to begin with, even at that price. And then, like Dan says in the chat, you can move elsewhere if it doesn't go well. There are plenty of well-priced midfielders you can hop across to, and then you can distribute funds elsewhere after a few game weeks' time. But I think it will take people a few weeks to kind of divest or move the money away from Salah. So I think it's safer in numbers to begin with. And it's such a boring response, but FPL is a tactical game as well as a game of raw points. You might steal a march. You might get way out ahead of the crowd by not having him and sprinkling that money elsewhere. But I think it's still more likely that you lose out, and you could leave yourself in a bit of a hole with a mountain to climb after a few game weeks' time. So I've seen FPL General going without both of them for the whole season, by the way.
I was going to
say really interesting experiment. And I think if I was a very brave manager, I'd give it a go. But and I think this year might be a year where that does actually work. I think it's possible, but I'd rather find that out over the first few game weeks than just go with that prediction from the off and hope it comes true.
Yeah, maybe there's a hangover as well from last year with Haaland and kind of the drop off there, and people thinking, oh, you know what, I could have done so much better if I'd gone without Haaland, and people kind of applying that scenario to Salah,
potentially.
But I'm very much with you. And remember, the first few weeks are the time where you have Salah as a vague differential, even more so for Haaland this year. Those first few weeks are people who won't have Salah. So yeah, I'm probably with you there. Bruno Fernandes, we've spoken about him a little bit, so I'm not going to go back to that one if that's okay, Sam.
Sure.
Palmer ran cold at the back of last season, as we all know, but despite indifference, was 5th overall for mids over the last the last half. Came away with 5 fewer attacking returns than he should have. 4 involvements and 9 was expected. But those really good opening fixtures, we said last week, and I don't think I've demurred from that too much, Sam. He's a player who kind of walked into my team, and he hasn't really moved anywhere for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially if I'm not bench boosting game week 1, he's almost certainly in. If I am bench boosting, I quite like the way I can use that extra Palmer money and spread it to give myself a better bench boost. But that's almost what's putting me off bench boosting in game week 1 at the moment. We probably a whole separate pod in itself. But the data's great. Look, he wasn't great at the back end of last season. It was a drop off, but he came good in the Club World Cup. And I think having seen his performances in the Club World Cup, it reminded me that players do go through little patches, and the underlying quality of the player is very much alive in Cole Palmer. He's also at that sweet price point where, other than Salah, if anything didn't go well with him, you can get to literally any other midfielder with one move. So you can get down to Saka if it proves that Saka's still on penalties and still a very good option, which I'm sure he will be a good option, but I think he'll lose penalties to Gyökeres, put it that way. And likewise with Fernandes, you can jump down to Fernandes when they reach a good set of fixtures, if he is still getting the good underlying attacking data and is a bit of a cheat code at 9 million with the DEFCONs. So I think Palmer's one of those like logical hygiene picks at the start of the season that I do expect him to do really well with those fixtures. And if he doesn't, then it's one free transfer down to literally any other midfielder you could ever want, and you can still get yourself something pretty valuable after that.
Agreed. I'm very pro Palmer.
Yeah.
Just it feels like a bit of the hygiene factor. Even if I do bench boost in 1, I'm not going to be looking at removing Palmer from that, because I'm going to want him, right? So it's very much sort of like starting from the position of I want to save the transfer. More of which a couple of weeks time. Saka, my favourite player in the Premier League right now, and not in my team, and I feel a bit bad about that, because I do love the guy, and I think that there's going to be, I obviously last year was wrought with injury problems, but obviously on every season I think he comes with a guarantee effectively of a 200 club, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that again this year. One of those that maybe just about gets crowded out, which is probably a bit bad to say, but if you are looking at having a 6 million defender, if you're looking at having a fairly stacked front line to some extent, I said earlier on, I'm not particularly excited by the cheaper forwards, but you kind of are, but that's kind of linked to you being less keen on the bench boost than I am. Then if you factor that all in, and then Salah and Palmer, then Saka sort of misses out, and you're kind of, I don't know, I feel a bit uneasy about that, but it is what it is right now, I think, in terms of not owning him. It might be that I try to do something and kind of end up with some terrible like Metcha or something like that from Leeds, or Perot as my sort of enabling forward to ensure that I get Palmer in Saka in my midfield. That could happen, but yeah, one of those who's a bit of a reluctant love and leave for me at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't let last year put you off because it was so racked by injury, and we know what a great player is, don't we, Sam?
Oh yeah, I would put him as a world-class player. I think off that right wing, serving Gyökeres as well, it's going to be fantastic, that partnership. But I a bit like with Salah and Isak joining and Wirtz and all of that, I do just wonder how the goal share is going to be affected there. I don't think Arsenal are going to bump up by an extra XG per game or anything. So given that they shared around the goals fairly well anyway, and I can't shake the feeling that Saka's going to lose penalties. I think Gyökeres coming in with that record as the main centre forward, I just think he takes him off of him. I can't back the idea that he's going to keep penalties, or I'm certainly not confident in it. And I think that dents him enough that I'm willing to go without him to begin with. And again, if I'm proven wrong, I can get to him quickly from Palmer if I need to. But his goal threat isn't as high anyway. His assist threat's higher, but we all know that you get more points for a goal threat than an assist threat. So yeah, I love him as a player. He's absolutely fantastic. But as an FPL pick, I think Palmer edges him just for now.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, he always want those players with the goal threat on top of the assist possibility. And finally, Florian Wirtz. I'm leaving Son because I don't know. We've got Marmoush actually in a second too, but I just mentioned Wirtz quickly. So consistently getting 13 to 15 XGI per season. And I saw a few people look at that and kind of turn around and say, oh, he's only done this throughout the course of his career. So he's therefore only going to ever get there. The guy's 21.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched a lot of him play because the Bundesliga is on when the Premier League isn't. And I was playing Fantasy Bundesliga fairly seriously. I mean, he's a really. I mean, you think Eze is a baller? Wait until you see this guy at full pelt. Like he's so bloody good, and it's the folly of many a pseudo analyst to assume a player doesn't improve, and he'll just keep replicating the past seasons over and over again. Like if he's a 28, 29-year-old, I mean, okay, unless you've got Harry Kane or something, that's a fair assumption to make. But the guy's 21; he's producing that. He's going to be such a good footballer, I think. And I'm sure that Liverpool seem to agree with me. So hey, you know what? Employ me now, Liverpool. But hey, I do think that the price of Vers is so good in so many ways. One, because he's easy to get to from any of these players if something goes wrong, or he does seem to be a player that you want to pick up. He's easy to kind of reach. And two, when we first saw it, we were both kind of saying, maybe that's a little bit cheaper than we'd have thought. But when you look at the context of the entire thing, it kind of makes sense. Because he's an unproven quantity, he's got, yes, not the best, or he's got decent XGI per season, but it's one of those you look at it and just think, oh, at that price, it could be great. And next year, you could see him at kind of 10, 11, 12 because of how good he's done in this first season. So potentially a really exciting kind of pick and a really expensive price, which could end up breaking the game. But I think they've kind of done a good job there, Sam, of kind of just pitching it at just the right level compared to the rest of the price pool.
I agree. A bit like Saka, I'll kind of echo what I said there. I think he's potentially a world-class player and potentially a very good FPL asset as well. But the data that he had in the Bundesliga last season included some penalties in there. He won't have that this season. And a lot of people are saying, yes, his underlying data is very good. And if he'd played a full 38 game week season, it would have been incredible, probably looking at 30 plus attacking returns. But why didn't he play a full season? And I just wonder with the options that they've got in midfield, we've talked about McAllister, we've talked about Szoboszlai, that obviously they're bringing in forwards as well. Is he going to have minutes shared a little bit? Like, are they going to bring him off early now and then to just maintain him, keep the legs fresh? Like these things, although they don't seem like a big deal, they do matter for a player who's 8.5 million. You do have to consider that. I would always try to look for a player at that price anyway, who's getting 80 to 90 minutes every single match and you can rely on. Again, don't let me put you off of him whatsoever, anyone listening, because he's a phenomenal player and I think he will do very well as an FPL asset. But again, I've mentioned it a few times, but I'm just trying to deal with as many certainties as possible. And like you said, unknown quantity. There are some question marks over what position he's going to play exactly, how many minutes he's going to get a week, whether or not that XG/XA per 90 just slightly dives, or maybe over time rises as well as he becomes a better player. I just want to see how that all fits together. I'm still 50-50 on whether or not I pick him from the start, to be honest. I'm not ruling it out because I think he is that good that it might be worth just taking a bit of a risk on. But I'm making drafts where I've got 11 players I'm fully confident on at the moment. And if I start adding in a Wirtz, I'd be tempted to add in a Gyökeres on the same logic, and then things can start falling apart quickly.
It's going wrong.
Exactly. Like you start putting in one too many exciting pieces that have one or two minor question marks, and then the more of them you've got, if one of those question marks ends up being an exclamation mark and an actual problem, then you're giving yourself some issues to deal with fairly quickly. So yeah, look, I'm not ruling him out, but I think at time of recording, I'm probably going without him as it stands to begin with.
I think he only becomes consideration for me if I go with Haaland, and then I kind of try to have him as a bit of a fig leaf for the fact that I don't have Salah in. But yeah, it's an interesting one. We'll see how that transpires. And the final one is Marmoush. started off his assist career fairly well, 5.21 points per game. Ignore the def cons entirely, but a decent extra open 90. But notable because he's just a very streaky player, and benefits a lot from playing off a striker like Ekitike. Is Haaland that sort of striker? Absolutely not. But if there is something which happens to Haaland throughout the course of the season, or if he does start to go on a bit of a run, so he loves overperformance, Mr. Marmouche, then 8.5, I think that's a really fair price. So again, another player that I think could well be in the running for us going forward.
Competitive price, yeah, I like it. And a midfielder, I think that's interesting. I thought he'd be a striker, honestly.
Yeah, I think he's the Aubameyang of this year in lots of ways. We're like, oh, midfielder, really? I think we're losing him from the strikers, but it kind of makes sense as well to lose him from the strikers because you're not interested in any other City midfielders, are you?
Not really. Not to start with.
Maybe Phil Foden will come round. Who's the one player then?
I want it to happen. I want Foden to be the option. I think he can be, and I know we haven't talked about him today, but I think he can be. I think he's that good that he can get back to his best. But anyway, that's by the by.
Who's the one player then, Sam, who's going to be in your team for the whole season, do you think?
Van Dijk, I think.
Okay.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I don't want to lock in any promises yet. Let's get to game week 1 first.
I can see it.
I just think he's that nailed in, and he's so good on the baseline for def cons, and I just like it. At 6 million, I think he's underpriced. But we'll see. We
will draft.
Yeah, we'll see. He might not even be in my game week 1 draft. Who knows? Things will change. But at the moment, he's very much in, and I like the look of him a lot.
Whew, dear me. Well, my brain has melted now, and I don't think we even went through every player that could possibly have gone through. But hopefully that was vaguely insightful, vaguely useful. I don't even know. I'll listen back later or tomorrow or next day when I'm doing my run and be like, oh my Lord, we've missed every single player we should have spoken about on this list.
Definitely.
But that is always the nature of the price pods, trying to get it down to whether we end up 100 minutes. I'm very sorry. Yeah. If you have listened this far, thank you very much. A lot of work goes into this particular one every year.
Yeah. Tom especially worked really hard on this. So yeah, show your love. Make sure you leave a like, hit subscribe as well. We'd really appreciate it, and especially for Tom's sake as well. Just give the pod a 5-star review. All of that good stuff. I know I will always say that at the end of the pod anyway, but like just from the heart, it would mean a lot, especially to Tom, having done this for so many seasons. I can take it or leave it, do whatever for me. But yeah, Tom really cries himself to sleep over it, so make sure you do. Yeah. Right, okay, before I go completely insane, because I think I'm on the cusp of it now, 100 minutes in. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you did get good value from it. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky, Who Got the Assist, all spelt out, all one word, or FPL Pricey for me. X is WGTA_FPL, FPL Pricey again. And on YouTube, it's WGTA_FPL if you want to see all of the graphics we were talking about today during the show. And again, I have my own channel on here, FPL Pricey, which is, at time of recording, 22 subscribers away from 4,000. So I'd really appreciate getting there by the start of the preseason, by the start of game week 1, end of preseason, I mean. Thank you all so much for watching. If you could follow us on those social channels, if you could give the pod a 5-star rating, and of course, leave a like, hit subscribe on YouTube, and we'll be very, very happy people.
Yes, thank you very much. Do follow Sam as well. Thanks, Sam. That was pretty huge. We really hope you think about this deep dive into pricing. We're back next week with FPL Raptor to discuss psychology and FPL. Looking forward to that, and we'll speak to you very, very soon. Goodbye.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?